Tonight, on Fear NOX, we walk long corridors after the last docent locks the side doors, and the air rests inside the glass. These accounts come from night supervisors, conservators, guards, and contractors whose recorders kept running while the lights cycled. Marble floors hold soft echoes. Coastal fog drifts through loading bays, and climate rooms hum like a steady heart. 10 true, most disturbing museum after-hours horror stories. Hear a gallery counter click while the beam is clear. A sealed case breathe across a handheld mic, and a service phone ring from an empty stair landing. Human threat lives in an imposter courier who knows the back route and a key code. Natural hazard lives in wet stone steps, and a pressure drop that pulls a door like a tide. If you have ever walked a collection in silence, this is for you. These are real places and working notes, so listen close. Drop your own story below. We read them all. All right, let us get into it. I've been a night guard for 17 years, mostly in institutions that value history more than modern security. This particular museum, a sprawling limestone structure built in the late 1800s, is a prime example. My beat covers the East Wing, a collection of galleries dedicated to early American artifacts. It's a quiet wing, usually. The air is always cool, kept at a precise 72 degrees Fahrenheit and 45% humidity to protect the exhibits. My tools are standard: a heavy-duty flashlight, a radio, a set of master keys, and a handheld thermal imager. The museum also employs a comprehensive network of motion sensors, pressure plates, and, at the entrance to each gallery, discrete optical people counters. My routine is a comfort, a predictable pattern of checks and patrols from 2200 to 0600. My shift began like any other. I logged in at the monitor bay, checked the system status, confirmed all doors were secured, and began my initial sweep. The museum uses a digital log for patrols, requiring me to scan checkpoints at specific intervals. The East Wing, with its long, high-ceilinged galleries, is always the first on my route. The silence at night here is profound, broken only by the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional creak of settling timbers. Protocol dictates that at the start of each shift, I verify the reset of all gallery entrance counters. They should read 0. This confirms the previous shift cleared them and no one is unaccounted for from closing. It's a simple check, a quick glance at the small, recessed display next to the gallery door frame. Most nights, it's a non-event. I reach the East Gallery door at 2247. It houses the pre-colonial pottery and early settler tools, a collection that sees moderate daytime traffic. As I approached, I noticed the faint, red digital readout of the people counter. My internal clock registered a slight disconnect. It wasn't 0. It read 03. I paused, my hand on the cool brass of the door handle. That was unusual. The system had shown no motion alerts from this sector since 1930, well after closing. I confirmed the gallery door was locked and sealed. My first thought was a minor system glitch, a common occurrence with older hardware. Sometimes a dust mote or a stray moth could trigger a false positive, though rarely 3 times. My training kicked in.
Core protocol for an unexpected counter reading is to first visually verify the gallery's emptiness through the observation pane. Then check the system logs for any corresponding motion sensor trips. And finally, if necessary, perform a physical sweep. I pressed my face to the small reinforced glass pane set into the east gallery door. The room was dark, but the emergency lights provided enough ambient glow to see the distinct silhouettes of the display cases. It looked empty. No shadows moved. No forms were discernible. I pulled out my radio. Monitor Bay, this is East Wing. Confirming no motion in East Gallery, but people counter reads 3. Any recent activity logs? A moment of static, then the voice of the supervisor, his tone even. Negative, East Wing. All clear on our end. Sensors show no trips in that sector since museum close. Can you verify visual? Verified visual appears clear. Requesting permission for physical sweep. Permission granted. Proceed with caution. Log your entry time. I unlocked the heavy door, the click echoing in the vast space. The air inside felt still. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, painting arcs across the polished floor and the glass cases. The counter above the door clicked again, a soft, almost imperceptible sound in the quiet. 04. My gaze snapped back to the display. It had updated after I opened the door. That was new. I was the only one here. I stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind me, the heavy thud resonating. A chill, not from the climate control, prickled my skin. This wasn't a glitch. This was something else. My standard sweep procedure involves a grid pattern, moving slowly, checking behind every display, every column, every potential hiding spot. I activated my handheld thermal imager. The screen glowed green, showing the ambient temperature of the room. The cases, the walls, the floor, all within the expected range. No heat signatures, no human-sized thermal outlines. Yet, the counter clicked. 06. 07. I moved deeper into the gallery, my boots making soft, rhythmic sounds on the marble. The smell of old wood and the faint, metallic scent of the preserved artifacts filled the air. Usually this aroma was comforting, a tangible connection to history. Tonight it felt cloying, oppressive. I ran the thermal imager along the long row of pottery cases, then along the opposite wall where the early tools were displayed. Nothing. Just the uniform green. I was about halfway down the main case row when it happened. A soft breath, distinct and cold, passed my right ear, just brushing my collar. It was so faint, so fleeting, that for a split second I dismissed it. A draft from the HVAC, I told myself, even though the system was designed for minimal airflow disturbance. I even reached up, touching my collar, half expecting to find a loose thread or a spider web. My thermal imager, held steady in my left hand, showed nothing. No heat plume, no condensation, just the steady green. But the counter clicked again. 12. A wave of unease, cold and sharp, washed over me. I'd been on this job for years, seen my share of odd things. Shadows playing tricks, system errors, even a raccoon once. But this was different. My professional mistake, perhaps, was trusting the thermal imager too implicitly, letting it override the direct, undeniable evidence of my own senses for a moment too long. I should have called for backup immediately after the first unexplainable tick. I finished the sweep, my pace quickening, my flashlight beam twitching. The counter reached 18 by the time I was back at the door. The gallery was empty. Visibly, thermally, acoustically empty, save for the clicks. The standard protocol for an intruder: locate, identify, contain, report, was useless here. How do you contain something that isn't there? I radioed the supervisor again, my voice tight. East wing to monitor bay. Sweep complete. Gallery appears clear, but the counter is now at 18. And I had a sensory input. Possible draft, but it felt closer. Understood, East wing. Return to monitor bay. Let's review the system logs together. The walk back to the monitor bay felt longer than usual. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe the optical counter was malfunctioning in a way that mimicked actual passes. But why only this gallery? And the breath. I remembered a quiet morning years ago, sitting on my porch, watching the sun rise over the city, a cup of coffee steaming in my hands. The peace of that moment felt impossibly distant now, replaced by the persistent chill in my bones. Back in the monitor bay, the supervisor was already pulling up the East Gallery's sensor data. The main screen showed the live feed from the gallery's overhead cameras. Still empty. But in the corner of the screen, the digital counter displayed 22. Nothing on motion sensors, the supervisor confirmed, scrolling through logs. No pressure plate activations. Air quality sensors are stable. He pulled up a specialized diagnostic for the optical counter itself. It's registering passes, but no corresponding triggers from any other system. Then he brought up the infrared drift echo system. This wasn't a standard thermal imager. It was a highly sensitive system designed to detect minute changes in ambient heat, even those too faint or transient to register as a full thermal signature. It was mostly used for environmental monitoring, detecting subtle air currents or equipment overheating. On the drift echo overlay for the East Gallery, a faint, shimmering distortion appeared and vanished near the pottery cases. It wasn't a solid color, not a heat signature, but a ripple in the thermal field, like heat haze over asphalt on a summer day, but inside a climate-controlled room. It flickered, a transient echo, then disappeared. A second later, the counter on the main screen ticked again. 23. The supervisor leaned closer, his brow furrowed. What is that? It's not registering as motion, not a person. But it's there, and it correlates. He scrolled back through the logs. Each time the counter had ticked up, the drift echo system had recorded one of these faint, shimmering disturbances, always in the same general area near the case row. They weren't strong enough to trip the motion sensors, which had a higher threshold. They were something else. The counter continued to climb slowly but steadily. 27. 28. The East Gallery remained visibly, utterly empty on the monitors. The supervisor and I sat in silence, watching the impossible numbers accrue. The system was counting something that wasn't there, yet the most sensitive thermal equipment was registering something at the exact moment of each count. "What do we log this as?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The supervisor ran a hand through his hair. Anomalous counter-activity. Unexplained drift echo signatures. "We'll have the system checked in the morning, a full diagnostic." But we both knew a diagnostic wouldn't explain the breath on my collar, or the feeling of utter stillness in a room that was clearly, undeniably being passed through. The counter ticked again, reaching 34. The East Gallery, still and empty, seemed to hold its breath. I've been a facility supervisor for this complex for 15 years. It's a sprawling industrial site on the coast, mostly cold storage and light manufacturing, built in phases from the late 1960s. My job is to keep everything running, from the HVAC on the main production floor to the antiquated intercom system in the oldest sections. I know the blueprints by heart, the quirks of every electrical panel, the way the sea air corrodes wiring if you don't stay on top of it. My toolkit, a worn Pelican case, holds everything from a multimeter to a fiber optic splicer. I've seen it all, or so I thought. The night shift was winding down, 3:15. Fog had rolled in thick off the Pacific, blanketing the entire bay. It muted the distant hum of the port, leaving only the immediate closer sounds. The drip of condensation from a roofline, the low thrum of the main chiller unit, the occasional squeal of a gantry crane shifting containers in the loading bay. I was doing my final walkthrough, checking security points and logging ambient temperatures. Protocol dictates a full circuit before turnover, especially when visibility is low. It's easy for small issues to become big ones in the fog. I was heading down the old service stairwell, the one that connects the administrative offices to the lower loading docks. It's a concrete shaft, utilitarian and dimly lit, rarely used except for maintenance access or emergency egress. Halfway down, on the third-floor landing, something broke the quiet. A telephone rang. It wasn't a fire alarm, not a general announcement. It was the distinct, insistent ring of an old rotary dial wall phone, the kind with the heavy bakelite handset and a coiled cord that's gone stiff with age. I stopped, my hand on the cold steel railing. My first thought was a mistake, a prank by a tired night watchman. But there was no phone on that landing. Not on any current directory, not on any schematic I'd ever seen. Every communication line in this facility is documented. Every single one. We have a master wiring diagram, digital and paper, updated quarterly. Every jack, every extension, every patch panel connection is accounted for. It's a critical security and operational protocol. An undocumented line is an impossibility, a direct violation of safety and control. I pulled out my work tablet, brought up the schematics for the C-block stairwell. Nothing. The wall was bare concrete, save for a fire extinguisher mount and an emergency light. But the ringing continued, steady and clear, seeming to emanate from the very wall itself. I ran my hand over the rough concrete. Then I saw it, tucked into a small, almost invisible recess, painted over countless times to blend seamlessly with the wall, was an old phone box, the kind that had been standard issue in government buildings decades ago. It had a dull, institutional green finish, almost black in the low light. The ringing stopped abruptly as I reached for it. For a moment I considered leaving it, logging it, then reporting it to communications first thing in the morning. That was protocol. Observe, document, report. But the sheer anomaly of it, the impossible presence of an active, ringing phone where none should exist, overrode my usual caution. Plus, a small part of me, the one that remembers the thrill of finding a hidden passage in my grandfather's old barn as a kid, wanted to see what was on the other end. That was my mistake, letting curiosity override procedure. I opened the box. Inside, nestled against worn insulation, was the phone. It was heavier than I expected, the plastic casing thick and robust. I lifted the handset. The ringing had stopped, but a sound filled the receiver. Not dial tone, not static. It was a low, resonant hush, like the sustained breath of a vast, unseen thing. It was the sound of the fog outside, amplified and contained. I held it to my ear for a full minute, listening. The air in the stairwell was still and cool, carrying the faint, metallic scent of old concrete and dust. The sound on the phone was constant, unwavering. There was no click, no voice, no indication of a connected line. Just that profound, echoing hush. I pressed the receiver against my other ear, trying to isolate the sound. It was coming through the phone, not from the room. I walked the handset over to the nearest comms panel, a locked utility closet on the second floor. Using my universal key, I opened it, exposing a tangle of copper and fiber. I located the conduit for the stairwell. There was no branch for a phone on the third-floor landing. I used my tone generator, clipping it to a dead line, tracing it with my probe. Nothing. I tried several lines. No signal, no bleed. This phone was not connected to our system. It was an island. I returned to the landing, the handset still pressed to my ear. The sea hush was still there. I looked out the narrow, grimy window of the stairwell. The fog was a solid, impenetrable wall pressing against the glass. The loading bay, usually a hive of activity, was swallowed whole. The sound on the phone was the exact auditory texture of that fog, but somehow more. It felt like the fog had seeped into the very wiring, becoming a conduit for something beyond its usual meteorological properties. I tried to call my counterpart, the night supervisor for the adjacent section, on my radio. Unit 2, this is Supervisor. You got a minute? Go ahead, Supervisor. Everything quiet on your end? Define quiet, I said, then hesitated. How do you describe a phantom phone ringing with the sound of a submerged ocean? I'm on the service stairwell, 3rd floor. I've got an anomaly, an old phone box, active but not on any schematics. It's making a sound. There was a pause. A sound? Like what? A short? Static?
It's a deep resonance, like the sea, but contained. Another pause. Supervisor, you've been working too many doubles. We got a forklift down in A7. I'm heading there now. Log it, and we'll look at it in daylight. Probably just some old line bleeding through. I clicked off the radio. He was right, in a way. It was probably just some fault, some forgotten cross-connect from decades ago. But the sound, it was too specific, too sustained. I decided to try and trace the physical line, not the signal. I pulled out my small inspection camera, the kind with the flexible neck, and snaked it into the wall cavity where the phone's wire disappeared. The camera's light illuminated ancient plaster, crumbling insulation, and then a thick, braided cable, unlike any modern comms line. It ran straight up, disappearing into the darkness above. I followed it. Up the stairwell, past the 4th floor, then the 5th. The cable was embedded directly into the concrete, a ghost limb of the building's forgotten past. It led me to the roof access door, which I unlocked. The fog was even thicker up here, swirling around the massive roof vents that ventilated the main production floor. The air was cold, damp, and tasted vaguely of ozone. The sea hush from the phone seemed to intensify as I stepped onto the roof. I walked towards the largest vent, a rusted metal cowl that looked like a giant mushroom. The braided cable emerged from the parapet wall, then ran directly into the vent shaft, disappearing into the darkness below. As I got closer, the sound from the phone in my hand became almost overwhelming. It wasn't just the sea hush anymore. There was a low, rhythmic pulse beneath it, a vast, slow exhalation. It was coming from the vent. It felt like the entire building was breathing. I held the phone up, pointing the receiver towards the vent. The sound on the line matched the sound coming from the vent perfectly, as if the vent itself was broadcasting directly into the phone. I pressed my ear to the cold metal of the vent. The sound vibrated through the steel, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to bypass my ears and go straight to my bones. It was the sound of immense pressure, of something vast and heavy moving beneath the surface. I thought of a memory from childhood, walking along the beach with my grandmother, holding a conch shell to my ear, listening to the ocean roar. This was that sound, but amplified, deepened, and utterly devoid of comfort. The phone in my hand suddenly rang again, a sharp, jarring burst that cut through the deep hum. I almost dropped it. I looked at the handset, then back at the vent. The ringing was coming from the phone, but the source felt like it was originating from within the vent itself. I put the handset back to my ear. The sea hush was gone, replaced by a single, drawn-out tone, a pure, sustained note that vibrated with an impossible depth. It felt like a question, or a summons. I backed away slowly,
the phone still ringing in my hand, the pure tone resonating through the fog. I didn't know what kind of pressure line carry this was, or what kind of pressure it was carrying. I didn't know how a phone with no assigned line could ring, or how it could pick up the sound of something so vast and deep from within a roof vent. All I knew was that the protocol for undocumented lines did not cover this. I logged the incident at 4:02, noting, "Unidentified active comms line, unexplainable audio anomaly." I left the phone in its box, closed and locked. It hasn't rung since, but sometimes, on foggy nights, when I pass that landing, I can almost hear the deep, vast hush, humming just beneath the surface of the concrete. And I wonder what exactly is on the other end of that unlisted line.
My work as a conservator in a major university archive is a study in stasis. For 17 years, I've overseen the preservation of historical documents, maps, and artifacts, ensuring their unchanging state against the relentless march of time. Our facility, buried 2 levels below ground, maintains a constant 68 degrees Fahrenheit and 45% relative humidity, a controlled environment where decay is slowed to a near halt. Every item has a precise location, documented to the millimeter, its condition meticulously logged upon arrival and at regular intervals. Precision is not just a virtue here, it's the bedrock of our profession. My daily routine involves checks of environmental sensors, careful handling of fragile materials, and the meticulous updating of digital logs. I use pH-neutral tools, archival-grade adhesives, and a steady hand. The silence in the archive aisles, broken only by the low hum of the HVAC system, is a comfort. It signifies stability, the successful arrest of entropy. A few weeks ago, I was performing a routine inventory audit in Aisle 7, a section dedicated to early 20th century expedition materials. Specifically, I was checking the integrity of a stack of crates containing geological samples from a 1909 Antarctic survey. Each crate was a sturdy, untreated pine box, sealed with archival tape, and labeled with a printed, acid-free stock label affixed with a reversible conservation adhesive. The labels detailed the crate's contents, provenance, and a unique identification number. I reached crate 773B, a box I remembered clearly from its intake process. It contained a collection of rock cores, heavy and dense. As I cross-referenced its physical label against the digital record on my tablet, something snagged my attention. The label, a standard 4x6-inch stock, was slightly askew. Not by much, perhaps a millimeter or two, rotated clockwise from its original, perfectly perpendicular alignment. My initial thought was adhesive creep. It happens.
Over years, even the best conservation adhesives can subtly shift under constant gravity and slight fluctuations in temperature, though our archives environment minimized this risk. I made a mental note to reseat it more firmly during the next full condition report. I logged its current state, noting the minor shift, and moved on. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, and I'll admit now, a minor professional mistake. I should have flagged it for immediate readhesion and a more thorough check. My mind was already on the next crate, the hum of the air handlers a constant, almost hypnotic drone. A week later, A request came in for a specific core sample from crate 773-B for an upcoming exhibit. This meant a full unsealing and internal inspection. I returned to aisle 7, the same crate stack. As I approached crate 773-B, my eyes went directly to the label. It was shifted again. This time, the rotation was more pronounced, perhaps 4 or 5 millimeters clockwise from its initial position, and now noticeably misaligned from the logged standard. This wasn't adhesive creep. Not at this rate, not in this environment. Adhesive creep is a slow, almost imperceptible process. This was a distinct, measurable displacement. I knelt, pulling out my magnifying loupe. That's when I saw it. A faint, almost invisible graphite smear, crossing the R in researcher on the provenance line of the label, just above the printed name of the lead geologist, Dr. Alistair Finch. It was a subtle mark, as if a pencil tip had brushed against it, but it hadn't been there a week ago. I logged the new position, photographed the smear, and then carefully, using a micro spatula, peeled back the label. The adhesive beneath was undisturbed, still tacky, no signs of degradation or failure. The label itself showed no stress marks from being peeled or re-adhered. It was as if it had simply slid. I reseated the label, meticulously aligning it to the logged coordinates, then applied a fresh layer of archival tape along its edges for extra security. A deviation from standard protocol, but one I felt was warranted. I documented everything, then went straight to my supervisor. The supervisor, a pragmatic man with 30 years in the field, listened patiently. He agreed the shift was unusual. Could be a microquake, a building tremor, he suggested, though our facility was designed to withstand significant seismic activity. Or a prank, though I can't imagine who. We reviewed the security logs for aisle 7. Nothing. No one had entered or exited the aisle between my checks. Access was strictly controlled by biometric scanners. Let's put a camera on it, the supervisor decided. Motion activated, low light. Point it directly at the crate. Setting up the camera was straightforward. I positioned it on a tripod at the end of the aisle, angled to capture crate 773-B clearly. The feed was routed to a dedicated monitor at the data log station, visible only to authorized personnel. We left it running for 3 days. On the 4th morning, I arrived early. The supervisor was already at the data log station, eyes narrowed at the monitor. He waved me over. "Take a look at this," he said, rewinding the footage. The timestamp read 02:17 a.m. The aisle was bathed in the camera's faint infrared glow, silent and empty. The crates stood in neat rows, undisturbed. Then, a flicker. A brief, almost imperceptible distortion in the frame, directly in front of crate 773-B. I leaned closer. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. The supervisor slowed the playback to half speed. Then, frame by frame. At 02:17:03, a dark, indistinct shape materialized for a single frame, partially obscuring the front of crate 773-B. It was too blurry to make out details, but it had the texture and slight curve of fabric. The aisle was empty again. The supervisor rewound, played it again. Flicker. gone. "What was that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," the supervisor replied, his brow furrowed. "It's not an artifact of the camera. The sensor logs show no power fluctuations, no interference." We watched the subsequent frames. At 02:17:08, the label on crate 773-B was visibly shifted again. The archival tape I had applied along its edges was still intact, but the label underneath had rotated further, perhaps another 3 millimeters. The graphite smear was still there, a dark line against the paper. The adhesive creep trace was undeniable. But how? We replayed the sequence dozens of times. Each time, the brief, dark, sleeve-like shape appeared, then vanished, leaving the aisle empty. The security system's motion sensors for aisle 7 showed no activation during that entire night. No one had entered. No one had left. The biometric logs were clear. The air pressure in the archive, another metric we monitor closely, showed no sudden changes that might indicate a door opening or closing. It was as if something had been there without being present. I thought about a summer day when I was a kid, trying to peel a sun-baked sticker off my bicycle without tearing it, the stubborn adhesive resisting my efforts. That was a simple, understandable resistance. This was something else entirely. The supervisor eventually powered down the monitor. "I'm going to file a full incident report," he said, his voice flat. "We'll secure the crate with a more permanent, non-reversible method, and we'll keep the camera running." We did. We sealed crate 773-B with a custom-fabricated aluminum band, bolted directly into the crate, making any further label movement impossible without visible damage to the band itself. The label was re-adhered using an industrial-grade, permanent conservation adhesive. The camera has been running for weeks now. The aisle remains empty on the footage. The environmental controls are stable. The crate is secure. But I still check the monitor every morning, half expecting that flicker, that impossible sleeve, to reappear. The label hasn't shifted since, but the graphite smear, a thin, dark line across a name, remains. And the question of what caused it, and what briefly appeared in an empty, locked corridor, remains unanswered. A chilling contradiction to everything I know about preservation and the immutable nature of our world. My shift as dock watch started at 2100. For 11 years, I'd overseen the inbound and outbound operations at this facility, specifically the security of the loading docks and the adjacent storage bays. My station was a small, climate-controlled room overlooking the main dock bay, but my primary tools were the monitors, a bank of 12 screens cycling through camera feeds, a digital alarm panel, and the access control system interface. This facility handled high-value cargo, so security protocols were stringent. Every door, every gate, every entry attempt was logged, time-stamped, and associated with a specific access card or keypad code. That was the bedrock of our security. A typical night was quiet. The main activity ceased by 1900. After that, it was just the occasional late freight truck, cleared by manifest and driver ID, or an emergency supply run. The side dock specifically was almost entirely dormant after 2000. It was primarily used for smaller courier pickups and deliveries during business hours. Its keypad access code was reset bi-weekly, and the day code was distinct from the night code. Any attempt to use a day code after hours would trigger a denied signal on the keypad, an audible alert in my office, and a red flag on the access log. That was the protocol. That was the rule. It was 0137 when the anomaly occurred. I was watching camera 4, which covered the side dock entrance. The air conditioning unit in my office had a slight rattle, a minor annoyance I'd learned to tune out over the years. Outside, the temperature had dropped, and I could see the faint vapor of my breath on the camera feed as a figure approached the side dock door. A courier, by the looks of it. Dark uniform, ball cap, carrying a small package. Late, but not unheard of. Sometimes a critical part needed to move immediately. The courier didn't have a vehicle visible on camera. They simply walked up from the blind spot behind the dumpster enclosure. Which was odd. Most couriers arrived in marked vans. I leaned forward, ready to initiate the intercom if they needed assistance, or to verify their credentials if they attempted entry. They didn't use the intercom. They went straight for the keypad. I watched their fingers move, precise and quick. My eyes, conditioned by years of watching these keypads, registered the sequence almost instantly. It was the day dock code, the specific 4-digit sequence used by our morning and afternoon couriers. My internal alarm bells went off. That code shouldn't work. It was 0137. The system should deny it. But it didn't. On camera 4, I saw the small, almost imperceptible shift in the door frame as the electronic bolt retracted. I heard the faint, distinct thunk of the solenoid from the external microphone feed. Then, just as quickly, the bolt threw back into place with another thunk. The door remained shut. The courier paused, looked at the keypad, then at the door. A flicker of something unreadable on their face. They tried the code again. Same sequence. Same precise, quick fingers. Same thunk-thunk from the door, bolt retracting and resetting. The courier stood there for another second, then turned and walked back the way they came, disappearing into the blind spot. No vehicle. No further attempt. No communication. I immediately brought up the access control system on my secondary monitor. I navigated to the side dock logs, filtered by timestamp, looking for 0137. Nothing. No entry attempt. No denied access. No successful entry. The log was blank for that minute, and for the minutes before and after. My system, the bedrock of our security, showed no record of the interaction I had just witnessed. I checked the alarm panel. No alarm for the side dock door. No tamper alert. No forced entry. Nothing. The panel was green. All systems nominal. This was impossible. Every keypad interaction, successful or not, I scrubbed the camera 4 footage back 10 seconds, then played it forward again. The courier. The fingers on the keypad. The subtle movement of the door. The audible thunk-thunk. It was all there, clear as day. My first thought was a system glitch. I'd seen minor hiccups before, but never a complete failure to log an event, especially one where the door mechanism physically reacted.
I tried to pull up the courier's manifest, but without an entry attempt, there was no record to cross-reference. I radioed my supervisor. Unit 1 to supervisor. I have an anomalous event at the side dock, requesting immediate review of camera 4 footage and access logs. Go ahead, Unit 1, came the reply, a little groggy. What's the nature of the anomaly? Courier attempted entry with an expired day code. The door bolt retracted and reset, but the access system shows no log entry for the attempt. No alarm triggered. There was a pause. Are you certain, Unit 1? No log entry at all? Affirmative. At 0137, I witnessed the event on camera 4. Stand by. I'll be there in 20. While waiting, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The silence of the logs was louder than any alarm. I replayed the footage again, this time focusing on the courier's face, trying to discern anything. Their ball cap obscured most of it, but their posture was confident, almost casual. Too casual for a late-night delivery that had just failed. I made a minor mistake then. Instead of immediately checking the physical integrity of the door and keypad, I spent another 10 minutes meticulously reviewing the digital records, convinced I must have missed something. I pulled up the system diagnostics, checked the keypad's last communication time. Everything reported as normal. It was a cold, digital lie. I decided I couldn't wait for the supervisor. I needed to see the door itself. I grabbed my flashlight and my facility keycard. The walk through the silent main dock bay was eerie. The high bay lights cast long, stark shadows. The air was colder here, carrying the faint metallic scent of ozone from the distant welding shop. I remembered a summer evening years ago, sitting on a similar dock with my grandfather, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, feeling the warmth of the concrete beneath us. That memory felt impossibly distant now. Reaching the side dock, I scanned the area with my flashlight. No signs of forced entry. The keypad looked normal, its backlit numbers glowing softly in the dark. I ran my gloved hand over the surface, checking for any residue or signs of tampering. Nothing. I tried the door handle. Locked tight. I knelt and examined the gap between the door and the frame, looking for tool marks. Clean. I pulled out my multi-tool and carefully checked the screws on the keypad housing. All secure. I stood back, shining my light on the door itself. It was a heavy-gauge steel door, designed to withstand significant force. The electronic strike plate was flush with the frame. There was no physical evidence of anything amiss. Yet, I had seen the bolt throw. I had heard it. Back in the office, the supervisor arrived, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He watched the camera footage, his brow furrowed. "That's something," he murmured, seeing the bolt retract and reset. "But the logs show nothing, not even a failed attempt." "I know," I said, my voice tight. "I checked everything, physically inspected the door, nothing." He tried to rationalize it. Maybe a momentary power surge to the keypad, a phantom signal. "A phantom signal that knew the day code," I countered, "and caused the bolt to physically react twice but left no digital trace?" He had no answer. We spent the next hour cross-referencing camera angles, rechecking every system log, running diagnostics. The conclusion remained unchanged. A courier, whose identity was unknown and unlogged, had used an unauthorized code at an unauthorized time.
The door's mechanism had responded, but the system, the very foundation of our security, had failed to record the event. It was as if the keypad itself had a secret memory, a silent understanding with the door, bypassing the oversight of the central system. The supervisor eventually filed a report noting unexplained system anomaly and potential security breach, no evidence of entry. He ordered a full system audit for the morning and a change of all keypad codes. But the question lingered, a cold, unsettling certainty. Someone knew a code they shouldn't have. And our system, for all its supposed infallibility, had been utterly blind to it. The bolt had thrown, and then it had set back, leaving only a ghost of an entry in the dead of night. I've been an audio contractor for 15 years, specializing in environmental acoustics for sensitive installations. My work often takes me into museums, archives, and historical sites, places where the silence itself is part of the preservation effort. My toolkit includes high-sensitivity condenser microphones, portable multi-channel recorders, spectrum analyzers, and an array of specialized sensors for everything from infrasound to ultrasonic activity. I'm meticulous, certified, and I trust my gear implicitly. My job is to capture the sonic fingerprint of a space, to identify any anomalies that could indicate structural shifts, HVAC issues, or even pest activity. This particular assignment was at the city's main historical museum, a sprawling limestone edifice with wings dating back to the late 1800s. The task was a routine environmental audio baseline survey for the West Wing, specifically around a new exhibit featuring early colonial textiles. These artifacts were housed in hermetically sealed, climate-controlled display cases, each a self-contained microenvironment designed to maintain precise temperature and humidity. My role was to ensure external vibrations or sound frequencies weren't impacting the cases, and to log ambient conditions. It was late Tuesday, past midnight. The museum was a tomb, save for the hum of the HVAC and the distant thrum of the city's night traffic, filtered to a whisper. I was in the West Wing hall, setting up my mic rig near case 2. This particular case held a colonial-era sampler, intricate and faded, resting on acid-free linen. I ran my initial sweeps, checking for stray electromagnetic interference, then positioned a pair of omnidirectional.
My internal log, timestamped 047, noted stable ambient conditions, 70.2 degrees Fahrenheit, 48% RH, 29.92 inches of VG. The air carried a faint, almost sweet scent of old wood polish and ozone, a smell common to these old institutions. My core protocol is simple. Any deviation from established environmental parameters, especially concerning the sealed cases, is immediately flagged and reported to facilities. These cases are engineered to be impervious. No internal atmospheric changes should occur without a catastrophic breach or a deliberate system adjustment from the museum's climate control specialists. My job is to monitor the external environment, not the internal. I was calibrating the gain on my recorder when I saw it. A small,
perfect crescent of fog condensed on the inside of the glass of case 2, directly over the sampler. It was about the size of a thumbnail, maybe a little larger, and it appeared from nowhere. I froze, my hand hovering over the recorder's dial. My initial thought was a sensor malfunction, or perhaps a trick of the low-level security lighting. I'd been working for 14 hours straight, and fatigue can play tricks. I glanced at the microclimate pulse device on the case exterior. Its LED glowed steady green, indicating stable surface temperature and ambient humidity. No change. As I watched, the crescent slowly, almost deliberately dissipated, leaving no trace. The glass was clear again. It was impossible. A sealed case, internally climate-controlled, should not exhibit spontaneous internal condensation, especially not in such a localized, transient manner, and certainly not without a corresponding external temperature or humidity spike. I should have reported it immediately. That was the protocol. But my professional skepticism, mixed with a touch of overconfidence that I could troubleshoot any anomaly myself, made me hesitate. I wanted to understand it first. I rechecked my external climate sensors, then the microclimate pulse device.
All readings were still perfectly stable. No external trigger. The only logical conclusion was an internal climate event. But how? The case was sealed. I decided to deviate from my usual routine. Instead of packing up for the night, I retrieved a high-sensitivity handheld condenser mic designed for close proximity sound capture and carefully positioned it with its capsule pressed directly against the glass of case 2, aimed inward. This wasn't part of the baseline survey. This was a direct investigation, bypassing the official channel. I set the recorder to its highest gain and sampling rate, bypassing all noise gates and filters. I wanted raw audio. I stood there in the silence, watching the glass, listening through my monitoring headphones. For several minutes, nothing but the faint internal hum of the case's own climate system, a high-frequency whine barely audible. Then, it happened again. Not the condensation, not yet, but the mic picked it up. A soft, almost imperceptible shift in the internal acoustic signature. A low-frequency pressure wave, subtle but distinct. My eyes darted to the glass, and there it was. Another crescent, slightly larger this time, forming just below where the first one had been. It spread slowly, a tiny, misty arc, and through the headphones, amplified, undeniable, I heard it. A single, slow exhale. It was soft, intimate, a breath against glass. The sound was unmistakable. A deep, resonant whoosh that lasted perhaps 2 full seconds, followed by a faint, almost imperceptible click as the condensation began to recede. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled the headphones off, my hands shaking. I replayed the recording. The whoosh was clear. I played it again, scrubbing the timeline, isolating the event. The microclimate pulse device, still on the exterior, had not registered any external change.
But when I downloaded its internal log, I found it.
A brief, localized spike in internal humidity, correlating precisely with the condensation event, but without any corresponding temperature or pressure change. This was physically impossible. For humidity to spike without temperature or pressure fluctuation in a sealed environment, something had to introduce moisture without altering the other variables. A breath. I tried calling facilities, then security. No answer. It was after hours. My calls went to voicemail. The protocol of immediate reporting was now failing because there was no one to report to, and the evidence I had was so far beyond the scope of normal environmental anomalies that I didn't even know how to articulate it without sounding unhinged. I stood alone in the West Wing, the recorded breath playing softly on repeat in my headphones. The sampler lay undisturbed in its case, a fragile relic from a forgotten time. I thought of a quiet evening years ago, sitting on my porch during a summer storm, listening to the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof, feeling a sense of profound peace. That memory felt impossibly distant now. The silence of the museum was no longer peaceful. It felt heavy, expectant. The recording was on my drive. The climate data, contradictory as it was logged. The case remained sealed, its contents pristine. But something had happened inside that case, something that defied every principle of physics and engineering I knew. A breath, caught on tape, from a sealed environment. I had the evidence, cold and digital, but no explanation, no resolution, just the sound of an impossible exhale, echoing in the quiet, empty halls.
15 years on the night shift, overseeing building systems for a dozen downtown high-rises, teaches you to trust the hum of the HVAC, the thrum of the emergency generators, the low, almost imperceptible vibration of elevator cables running their routes. It's a language of stability, and when it changes, even subtly, you feel it. My station is a control room, a bank of monitors displaying schematics, power grids, and elevator statuses across the entire managed block. I'm certified in advanced building automation, licensed for high-voltage systems, and my toolkit, a worn leather bag by my chair, holds everything from a digital multimeter to a thermal imager. On nights like this, clear and cold, with the city lights a distant glow through the tinted glass, the only variable should be the occasional late-night delivery or a tenant forgetting their keycard. My routine is a loop: power grid diagnostics, HVAC pressure checks, then a full cycle through all elevator groups. Each car, passenger or freight, has its own dedicated display on the monitor wall. Green means operational. Yellow means on call. Red means fault. A simple system, designed for clarity and rapid response. The core protocol is unambiguous. An elevator only moves when a call is registered, either from a car button or a landing button. Every movement, every door cycle, every power draw is logged by the SCADA system, time-stamped to the millisecond. It's a robust network, built for redundancy and accountability. It was 0217 when Car 3, the heavy-duty freight elevator in the old warehouse section, broke the silence. The monitor for Car 3, usually a steady green in its idle state, showed no change. No call registered, no destination selected. But the speaker above my console, piped directly from the car's internal comms, emitted a distinct two-tone idle chime.
Ding dong.
The sound it makes when the doors are about to close after a long period of inactivity, or when it arrives at a floor and sits for a moment. My eyes snapped to the screen. Still green. Then, on the small animated graphic representing the car's doors, I saw it. The inner gate, a heavy steel accordion, rolled inward, maybe 2 inches, certainly no more than 3. It held for a breath, then stopped. Not closed, not open, just partially actuated. My first thought was a sensor fault, a ghost signal. But the chime? That's an operational sound, not a fault indicator. I pulled up the power logs for the entire block, specifically for Car 3's dedicated circuit. The graphs were flat, steady across the board. No voltage dips, no current spikes, nothing to suggest a power fluctuation that could trigger a partial cycle. If there was a brownout, the entire system would have registered it. This was an isolated event, unlogged by the very system designed to log everything. I grabbed my toolkit and radioed the security desk. Heading to Car 3, freight section. Unexplained gate actuation. Keep an eye on the monitors, especially Car 3. Roger that, engineer, came the reply, crisp and clear. The warehouse section was cold, the concrete floor radiating the night chill. The air carried the faint, metallic tang of industrial lubricants and something else. A faint, almost sweet smell like old, damp paper. I could hear the distant hum of the main hydraulic pump for the passenger cars, but Car 3's machine room was quiet. The freight elevator itself stood on the ground floor, its outer doors closed. I approached cautiously, scanning the area with my flashlight. No signs of forced entry, no debris near the tracks. The inner gate was indeed open a crack, exactly as the monitor graphic had shown. It looked like a dark smile in the gap of the outer doors. I keyed open the control panel on the landing. The call button was dark. No active calls. I pressed the open door button. The outer doors hissed open, revealing the partially retracted inner gate. I stepped into the car. The interior lights were on. The floor clean. I checked the car panel. No active destination. All buttons dark. I pressed close door. The inner gate rolled smoothly shut, followed by the outer doors. I pressed open door again. Everything functioned perfectly. I even sent the car up to the second floor, then called it back down. Each cycle was normal, responsive, and properly logged. I made a note in my handheld device. Car 3 operational. Gate actuation unrepeatable. I was almost willing to chalk it up to a phantom signal, a momentary hiccup in the aged wiring, a residual relay kick from a distant power surge that somehow bypassed the main loggers. It happens, sometimes. Not often, but it happens. Back in the machine room for Car 3, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of hot oil and ozone. The main control panel glowed with diagnostic lights, all green. I connected my laptop to the controller, pulling a full system dump. I cross-referenced the timestamps from the 2:17 event. Nothing. The system logs showed the car in an idle state. Doors closed. No calls. No power draw beyond standby. It was as if the event simply hadn't happened, at least not to the system's knowledge. This was the point where my initial assessment of a simple residual relay kick started to unravel.
A relay kick might explain a momentary mechanical twitch, but it wouldn't explain the chime, which is a software-initiated sound. And it certainly wouldn't explain the lack of a log entry for any gate movement. Any physical actuation, even a partial one, should register a sensor input. I tried to force a relay kick. I cycled the auxiliary power breaker for the door control circuit, then immediately re-engaged it. The system momentarily reset. The lights flickered, but the gate remained perfectly still. No chime.
The protocol for diagnosing phantom movements involved isolating circuits and testing for stray voltage, but without a reproducible event or a logged fault, I was chasing shadows. The system was reporting perfect health, yet I had witnessed a clear anomaly. It was like trying to fix a leak in a pipe that insisted it wasn't wet. I remembered a time, early in my career, when a simple loose wire on a service elevator had caused it to occasionally skip a floor. A quick tighten, and the problem was solved. This was different. This was fundamental. The system was denying an event I had observed. I walked back to the freight elevator, running my hand along the cold steel of the outer door. I checked the optical sensors for the gate, cleaned them with a microfiber cloth, even though they appeared spotless. No dust, no obstructions. The gate mechanism itself looked solid. No visible wear or damage to the tracks or rollers. I returned to the control room, the silence of the building now feeling heavier, less comforting. I stared at the monitor wall, at the green square for car 3. The data was clean. The logs were clean. Yet the idle chime had sounded, and the gate had moved. I kept replaying the event in my mind, searching for a detail I might have missed. The briefest flicker on the monitor, a momentary anomaly in the ambient sound that could be mistaken for a chime. No, the chime was distinct. The gate movement was distinct. The system was supposed to be my eyes and ears, my infallible record keeper. But it had failed to record something that demonstrably happened. It wasn't a malfunction. It was an omission. The freight car, sitting silent and still, had done something impossible. It had moved, it had chimed, and then it had erased its own tracks. I typed up the incident report, logging it as unexplained gate actuation, car 3. No corresponding system logs or fault codes. Observed 0217. The cursor blinked. The hum of the facility continued, a constant low drone.
But for the first time in a long time, the hum felt less like a language of stability and more like a held breath.
I've been a security sergeant for this coastal facility for 15 years. Mostly it's routine. Patrols, access control, incident reports. The occasional lost tourist who's wandered too far from the public access points. Our building is a concrete behemoth designed to withstand the Pacific weather, perched right on the edge of a cliff face. You learn its moods, the way the wind groans through the vents, the subtle shifts when the tide is particularly high or low. My gear is standard issue: radio, flashlight, access card array, and a handheld weather monitor that gives me real-time atmospheric pressure readings. On a typical night, I'd glance at it, note the barometric pressure holding steady around 10-12 millibars, and carry on. My shift started at 2200 hours. The forecast had called for a significant pressure dip, a low-pressure system moving rapidly inland after hugging the coast. We get them. but usually they come with heavy rain or high winds. This one was different. Deceptively quiet. The air felt heavy, still, almost thick. My initial patrol sweep was uneventful. I checked the perimeter fence, the loading docks, the main entrances. Everything secure. The building hummed, a low, consistent thrum that usually meant all systems were nominal. One of our core protocols, especially during any significant weather event, is a heightened vigilance on all fire doors and egress points. They're designed to be airtight and self-closing, maintaining compartmentation in case of fire. A properly functioning closer ensures the door latches fully, every time. It's a simple system, but critical. Any door found ajar, even slightly, is immediately secured and logged, with a maintenance request initiated if the closer appears faulty. This protocol is ingrained. You don't think about it. You just do it. Around 01:30 hours, I was on my second interior patrol, heading up the north stairwell. This stairwell is less trafficked, connecting a seldom-used research wing to the main levels.
As I approached the third-floor landing, I heard it. A soft, drawn-out exhalation. Not a creak, not a slam, but a slow, deliberate sigh. It was the fire door leading into the research wing. It wasn't fully open, but it had yielded against its closer by about an inch, maybe an inch and a half. My flashlight beam cut through the dimness. The gap was narrow, but distinct. What caught my eye, though, was the paper. Someone had taped a small, handwritten notice to the door jamb, just below the latch plate, detailing a temporary equipment relocation. The edge of that paper, caught in the narrow gap, was lifting. It wasn't flapping, not with any discernible draft. It was rising slowly, curling inward, then settling, then lifting again, like a miniature, silent tide. The movement was too deliberate, too smooth, to be a random gust. I stepped forward, my boot heels echoing on the concrete. My handheld monitor read 998 millibars. A dip, certainly, but not extreme enough to explain a fire door pushing open. I reached for the door, intending to push it shut. As my fingers touched the cool metal, I felt a subtle resistance, a slight suction, as if the building itself was inhaling. I pushed the door firmly back into its frame, heard the solid click of the latch. I made a mental note to log it as Fire Door 3N, closer adjustment needed, and moved on. It was a minor detail, easily overlooked as just another maintenance issue. My mistake was dismissing the cause, attributing it to a mechanical fault rather than an environmental one. 40 minutes later, after completing my sweep of the east wing, I decided to circle back to the north stair. Something about that paper, the way it had moved, had lodged in my mind. The air felt even heavier now, a dull pressure behind my eardrums. My monitor showed 994 millibars, and still, then I heard it again, that same soft sigh, this time a little louder, a little more insistent. The third-floor fire door was open again, the gap wider this time, perhaps 3 inches. And the paper, it was no longer just lifting and curling. It was fluttering, a frantic, silent dance against the door jamb, vibrating with an unseen current. The sheer force required to pull that heavy,
steel-clad door against its hydraulic closer was significant. This wasn't a faulty closer. This was something else. I radioed my supervisor. "Sergeant on 3rd floor north stair. Fire door 3N found open again. Atmospheric pressure showing unusual dip, 994 millibars and dropping. Requesting guidance on protocol." "Copy that, Sergeant," the supervisor's voice crackled. "Log it, secure it. Check other egress points. Keep an eye on that pressure." Standard, by-the-book response. But the standard protocol of close and log was clearly failing. The door was not staying shut. I tried to push the door closed again. This time I had to lean into it. There was a palpable resistance, a steady, invisible tug pulling it outward. It felt like trying to close a door against a strong current in water. The mechanism of the closer groaned, a low metallic complaint. I forced it shut, the latch engaging with a louder, more definite click. I stood there for a moment, listening. The building's hum had changed too. It wasn't the steady thrum. It was a deeper, almost resonant vibration, like a vast, muted drum. I could smell the faint metallic tang of the coastal air, even indoors, mixed with the institutional scent of disinfectant. It was a weird combination, and utterly irrelevant to the door, but it just added to the strangeness of the moment. I remember thinking about the old house I grew up in, how solid and unmoving it always felt, a stark contrast to this building that seemed to be breathing around me. I decided to abandon my usual patrol route and focus solely on the north stair. The pressure continued its descent, now reading 990 millibars. The deeper the pressure dropped, the more the building seemed to react. I started hearing other sounds, faint creaks from the structural steel, the subtle pop of ceiling tiles, tiny shifts in the building's fabric. These were sounds I rarely noticed, usually masked by the normal hum. At 02:15 hours, I was on the 2nd floor of the north stairwell when I heard a distinct, sharp crack from above. I rushed up. The 3rd floor fire door was now open by almost a foot. The closer arm was extended almost to its limit, visibly straining. The paper at the jamb was a frantic blur, vibrating so rapidly it was almost a hum. It was no longer a tide, it was a waterfall of paper, a constant, agitated stream. I approached cautiously. The air in the stairwell felt different, thinner, colder despite the internal climate control. I could feel the immense, unseen force pulling at the door. It wasn't just air pressure, it felt like something physical, a vast, invisible hand. I gripped the door handle, trying to pull it shut. It was like trying to close a sail in a gale. The closer groaned, a high-pitched whine now, fighting against the relentless outward pull. My boots slid slightly on the concrete as I braced myself, putting my full weight into it. The door shuddered, resisting. I could hear the frame itself creaking, the metal groaning under the stress. I was fighting the building, fighting the atmosphere. I could feel the pressure on my own eardrums, the subtle ache in my head. This wasn't just a faulty closer or even just a strong pressure differential. This was the building responding to an external force that felt almost alive, almost intentional. The paper at the jamb was a frantic, silent witness, a small, white flag of surrender against the invisible tide pulling at the door. Slowly,
I've been a guard trainee for just under 6 months, assigned to the overnight shift at the old Civic building downtown. It's a sprawling structure, built in the late 1800s, all marble, polished brass, and echoing spaces. My primary role is perimeter checks and internal patrols, logging any discrepancies. The building is quiet after midnight, a different entity entirely from its bustling daytime persona. My kit includes a standard two-way radio, a heavy-duty flashlight, a log tablet, and a small, portable audio recorder for incident documentation. A new addition to the standard gear, meant to capture environmental anomalies or suspicious sounds for later analysis by the security chief. The rotunda is the heart of the building, a massive circular chamber rising 3 stories to a domed skylight. The acoustics are notoriously tricky. Sounds carry, bounce, and sometimes seem to materialize from nowhere. My supervisor, a veteran with 30 years on the job, always stressed vigilance in this area. "The building talks to you," he'd often say, "but you gotta listen for the right voices." Part of my training involved learning to distinguish the creaks of settling foundations from actual disturbances. A standard procedure for the rotunda was a quick acoustic check. A low whisper, spoken directly into the center, followed by a moment of silence to gauge the echo. It was meant to train our ears, but mostly, it just highlighted how profoundly empty the space could be. It was 2:17 on a Tuesday, an unremarkable night. Outside, a thin fog had rolled in from the river, muffling the distant city hum. Inside, the air was cool, carrying the faint, dry scent of old paper and dust. A smell I'd come to associate with the deep quiet of the late hours. I stood on the polished marble mosaic at the rotunda's center, my boots making no sound on the worn surface. I pulled out my log tablet, tapped in the timestamp and location, then performed the routine acoustic check. I leaned forward slightly, cupped my hand to my mouth and whispered, "All clear." The sound barely left my lips, absorbed by the vastness. I waited. The usual immediate, diffuse echo was there, a soft wash of sound fading into the high dome. But then, a distinct beat later, a second voice answered. It was a faint, breathy sound, almost a sigh, but clearly articulated, a soft, drawn-out, clear. It didn't come from the floor or the arched doorways around me. It came from above, from the skylight well, a hollow response descending from the glass-paneled dome. My first thought was Unit 3, the senior guard. He was known for his dry humor. I straightened, scanning the upper balconies. "Unit 3?" I called out, my voice a normal volume this time. The sound was swallowed. No direct echo. Just the fading resonance of my own question. No reply. I checked my radio. Static. No incoming or outgoing calls. I tried again. "Unit 3, this is trainee. You up there?" Still nothing. A flicker of annoyance, then a prickle of unease. The supervisor had warned against pranks, especially in sensitive areas.
I pulled out my flashlight, aiming its beam up towards the skylight ring, the narrow walkway that encircled the dome at the third-story level, just below the glass. The light cut through the gloom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. But nothing else. No silhouette, no movement. The skylight itself was a grid of reinforced glass, misty with condensation from the fog outside. I decided to investigate. Protocol dictated reporting any unauthorized presence immediately. But I was convinced this was a fellow guard, and reporting a perceived prank could lead to unnecessary paperwork and a lecture. My fatigue from the long shifts
Instead of radioing dispatch, I started for the grand staircase, my boots clanking audibly now on the marble treads. The climb felt longer than usual. Each step brought me.
I've been a control room lead for over 15 years. This facility, a critical node in the regional power grid, runs 24/7, a sprawling complex of humming servers, insulated conduits, and secure access points. My shift, from midnight to 8 a.m., is typically the quietest. The nocturnal rhythm of the plant is a familiar drone, a predictable symphony of machinery and data streams. I know every hum, every flicker of the console lights, every camera feed. My eyes, conditioned by thousands of hours staring at screens, can spot an anomaly in a fraction of a second. A skill honed through endless routine and the occasional, genuine emergency. The control room itself is a windowless, climate-controlled bunker, the air always cool, carrying the faint, sterile scent of the industrial disinfectant the morning cleaning crew always used, mixed with the metallic tang of the distant server racks. My main console, a horseshoe of monitors and keypads, gives me oversight of hundreds of sensors, cameras, and access points. Behind me, on a sturdy metal shelf, sat the bank of two-way radios, each labeled with its assigned call sign, ready for immediate deployment. One of the less critical, but still monitored, areas is the back corridor. It's a maintenance route, an L-shaped passage connecting the secure storage bays to the loading dock. During my shift, it's rarely used. At the sharp bend in the corridor, a standard convex security mirror is mounted high on the wall. It's there primarily to prevent collisions between personnel and equipment carts, offering a wide-angle view around the blind corner. I often use it as a quick, peripheral check for unexpected movement, a low-priority visual aid complementing the dedicated CCTV feeds. It was around 3:17. The facility was quiet, all systems reporting nominal. I was reviewing the environmental sensor logs, a minor temperature fluctuation in substation gamma. Nothing critical, but enough to draw my eye from the main surveillance screens for a moment. That's when I saw it in the mirror. A figure. Indistinct in the wide-angle reflection, but clearly human-shaped, turning the corner from the longer stretch of the corridor. They were moving at a steady, unhurried pace, wearing what looked like standard facility workwear. Dark blue coveralls, perhaps a hard hat, though the reflection blurred the details. My brain registered the movement, and I instinctively shifted my gaze to the corresponding CCTV feed for the shorter section of the corridor, the area where the figure should have emerged. They never did. I watched the live feed. The corridor was empty, brightly lit by the overhead fluorescence, the polished concrete floor reflecting the harsh light. I blinked, leaning closer to the monitor, then back to the mirror feed. The mirror still showed the empty bend, the curved glass reflecting only the sterile, unoccupied corridor. It was as if the figure had stepped out of the mirror's reflection and simply ceased to exist. My first thought was fatigue. I'd been on shift for 5 hours, and the quiet hum of the control room could play tricks. But the image, though fleeting, had been clear enough to register. I immediately pulled up the access logs for the past hour, filtering for the back corridor. No entries. No scheduled maintenance. No one was authorized to be there. I checked the other cameras covering the perimeter and internal zones. All clear. No alarms, no breached sensors. I hesitated. A full facility sweep for a fleeting glimpse in a mirror felt like an overreaction, especially since all other systems reported normal. The protocol for unaccounted personnel sighting dictated an immediate comms challenge to the individual and, if no response, a 2-person sweep of the area. But who would I challenge? And
I've been an overnight supervisor for this industrial facility for 17 years. That's a long time to walk the same halls, check the same locks, and log the same entries. You get to know the hum of the HVAC, the specific creak of certain floorboards, the way the light from the security monitors reflects off the polished concrete. It's a quiet job, mostly, especially from midnight to 6. My shift starts at 10, ends at 6, and the bulk of it is spent ensuring everything is secure, running the hourly rounds, and logging any access or egress. The facility is a sprawling complex of warehouses, offices, and a small secure research wing. Access control is paramount. Every entry point, from the main gate to the roof hatch, is monitored and logged. We use a digital system for most things, but for critical access points, like the roof hatch, which leads to sensitive antenna arrays and environmental sensors, we maintain a physical logbook. It's a double check, a hard copy record that can't be digitally altered or corrupted. Each entry requires a signature, timestamp, and a brief reason for access. Upon return, another signature, timestamp, and verification of the hatch being secured. It's a simple, foolproof system. Or so I always believed. The log desk is in a small alcove just off the main security hub, opposite the wall of monitors. It's a standard metal desk, bolted to the floor, with a single heavy-bound logbook and a specialized pen. This pen isn't just any pen. It's a security-grade instrument with an internal pressure sensor that records stroke dynamics, pressure, speed, duration, mapping it against a database of authorized signatures. It's an extra layer of verification, designed to flag any forgery attempts. The data is transferred to a local server every hour. A red light flashes if the pen is removed from its cradle without a corresponding log entry. My routine dictated a check of the log desk at 200. The facility was quiet, the only sounds the distant thrum of the server racks and the steady, almost hypnotic click of the main clock on the wall. I always liked this part of the shift. It was predictable, a moment of calm before the final push to dawn. I approached the desk, my flashlight beam cutting a path through the dim, ambient light. The first thing I noticed was the pen. It sat on the desk, capped, beside the logbook. Not in its cradle, which was unusual, but not unheard of. Someone might have been called away mid-entry and just set it down. A minor lapse in procedure, easily corrected.
I made a mental note to remind the day supervisor about cradle discipline. Then I saw the desk surface. The desk surface, a dark laminate, was usually pristine, wiped down daily. But tonight, a faint, undisturbed layer of fine gray dust coated it. And in that dust, right where a right wrist would naturally rest while signing, was a neat, distinct loop. A perfect arc, as if someone had turned their wrist, signing their name, and then simply vanished. The pen, capped and still, sat just outside that loop. A prickle of unease started low in my stomach. I picked up the logbook. The last entry was dated 0147. Reason: roof access, sensor calibration. Signature: a familiar, looping script, clearly belonging to one of the authorized maintenance technicians. Below it, the return entry: 0155, hatch secured. And the same signature. I stared at the pen, then at the dust loop, then back at the logbook. The technician who signed this entry, let's call him the on-call tech, wasn't scheduled for tonight. I knew the roster by heart. No one was scheduled for maintenance work. My initial thought was simple fatigue, a misreading of the timestamp. I'd had those moments before, staring at a report after a particularly long night, my brain playing tricks. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the grit of sleeplessness. I pulled out my handheld radio.
Any personnel currently on site for unscheduled maintenance? The only response was the crackle of static, then the voice of the perimeter officer. Negative, supervisor. All quiet out here. Why do you ask? Just checking, I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. Carry on. My gaze fell on camera 2, the one pointed directly at the roof hatch entrance, visible on the monitor wall. It was a wide-angle shot, covering the hatch door and the immediate corridor. I walked over to the main console, my boots echoing slightly in the quiet hall. I rewound the footage for camera 2, punching in the timestamp. 0147. The screen flickered, then settled. The corridor was empty. The roof hatch door, a heavy steel slab, was closed and secured. At 0147.0, the door remained closed. At 0147.15, a faint shimmer, like heat haze, appeared directly in front of the hatch for less than a second. It wasn't a person, not a clear outline, just a distortion, like looking through a faulty pane of glass. Then it was gone. The door remained closed. The timestamp advanced. 0155.00. Nothing. The corridor remained empty. No one approached. No one opened the hatch. No one returned. I ran the footage again, frame by frame. The shimmer was there, undeniable, at 0147.15. But it was not a person. It was not the on-call tech. No hands, no body, no movement consistent with opening a heavy hatch. Yet, the logbook recorded an entry at 0147 and a return at 0155. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. The logbook was supposed to be the ultimate record. The pen, the signature, the physical act. But the camera showed nothing, and the pen, capped, sat on a dusty desk, with a wrist loop in the dust. I had to check the hatch itself. Protocol dictated that any discrepancy, no matter how minor, required a physical verification. I grabbed my master keycard and my secondary flashlight.
The roof access point was 3 floors.
The air grew colder as I ascended, the building's old ventilation system pushing a chill down the stairwell. I remembered a summer afternoon when I was a kid, sitting on the porch swing with my grandmother, the air thick and sweet with honeysuckle. The contrast with the sterile, metallic chill of this corridor was stark, almost jarring. The hatch door was heavy, reinforced steel, secured by a magnetic lock and 2 heavy-duty bolts. I ran my gloved hand over the surface. The dust here was undisturbed, a fine, even layer. No scuffs, no fingerprints, no indication of recent handling. The lock indicator light was solid green, showing it was fully secured. I pressed my ear to the cold metal. Nothing. Just the faint whisper of the wind outside. I returned to the security hub, my mind racing. The physical evidence, the undisturbed hatch, the capped pen, the dust loop, the camera footage showing no entry, directly contradicted the logbook. But the logbook entry was there, signed, time-stamped. My last resort was the pen's pressure trace script. I carefully picked up the pen, placed it in its cradle, and initiated a data download. The security system ran a diagnostic, then presented the pressure trace script for the 0147 entry. The screen filled with a jagged, colorful graph. It showed the distinct pressure points, the fluid strokes, the variations in speed that characterized the on-call tech's signature. It was unmistakably his. The system even provided a confidence score, 98.7% match. The pen had been used. It had recorded a signature at 0147 and again at 0155, with all the biometric data matching the authorized user. I stared at the screen, then at the empty log desk, then back at the monitor showing the still, empty corridor outside the roof hatch. The data was irrefutable. The physical evidence was irrefutable. And they were completely, utterly contradictory. The protocol for a security breach was clear. Lock down, notify authorities, secure evidence.
But what was the evidence here? A log entry that was both real and impossible. A pen that was used but untouched. A dust loop where a hand should have been but wasn't. I typed up a preliminary incident report, my fingers feeling clumsy on the keyboard. I detailed the log entry, the camera footage, the physical inspection of the hatch, and the pressure trace data. I left the concluding remarks blank. There was no conclusion. The sun would be up soon, and the day crew supervisor would arrive. I would hand over the report, and the facility would awaken, oblivious to the impossible thing that had signed itself in and out of the roof access log, leaving nothing but a ghost of a wrist in the dust.